Most people can name more than a dozen Canadian cities, but don't realize between those cities there are places that have been quietly, stubbornly inhabited for centuries, sometimes millennia, by communities that live entirely outside the road system, outside the grocery chain delivery routes, outside the reach of most of the modern world. Places where the nearest hospital is an hour's flight away. Places where the school principal doubles as the snowplow operator. Places where your neighbor's dog team is parked outside and nobody thinks that's unusual. This video is about those places. I found 21 of them. You have almost certainly never heard of most of them. Let's start. Number 21. Pelee Island, Ontario. Most people who find out that Pelee Island exists have the same reaction. They didn't know Canada's southernmost inhabited point was an island in Lake Erie, further south than parts of California. Pelee Island sits in the warmest part of one of the Great Lakes, and roughly 300 people call it home year-round, though thousands more arrive in summer to visit. It sounds idyllic, and in summer it is. Wine farms, warm lake breezes, cycling paths. But winter on Pelee Island is a different situation entirely. Lake Erie ice can shut down ferry service for weeks at a stretch, leaving the island accessible only by small plane. Residents who need medical attention, who have a family emergency, who simply want to leave, can find themselves stuck on 6 square kilometers of lake ice and farmland, waiting for conditions to clear. The isolation here is seasonal rather than permanent, but it is real, and it catches newcomers off guard. Pelee Island is on this list not because it is extreme, but because it demonstrates something important about isolation in Canada. It can happen in places that don't look remote on a map. Number 20. Bella Coola, British Columbia. Bella Coola is accessible, technically. Highway 20, which locals call the Freedom Road, connects it to Williams Lake in the interior. What the highway description does not prepare you for is the section known as the Hill, a stretch of road with grades reaching 18%, barely wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass, with no guardrails at several points and a drop into a valley that concentrates the mind considerably. For years, the province refused to pave or improve it, and residents built the road themselves in 1953. About 2,000 people live in the Bella Coola Valley today, surrounded on all sides by the Coast Mountains and the ocean fjord. Logging and tourism provide most of the employment. The valley has a quality of light in the late afternoon, gold off the peaks, the river bright below, that makes it look like somewhere no human should logically be living. And yet, people have been here for thousands of years. Getting a delivery truck in is an adventure. Getting an ambulance out is sometimes an emergency of its own. Number 19. Fort Simpson, Northwest Territories. The Mackenzie and Liard rivers converge at Fort Simpson, and that confluence has made it a meeting point for Indigenous peoples, fur traders, and travelers for centuries. About 1,100 people live here now, making it a regional center for the Dehcho region. Summer highways connect it to the rest of the territory, but NWT winter is not a theoretical concept. It is the kind of cold that makes machinery stop working and travel plans collapse entirely. Many residents fly in and out during the harshest stretches of winter rather than drive. Fort Simpson has government offices, a health center, a school. It functions as a service hub for communities even more remote than itself. But standing on the banks of the Mackenzie at the point where the rivers meet, looking out at the flat, unbroken expanse of boreal forest in every direction, the word hub requires some recalibration. Number 18. Tuktoyaktuk, Northwest Territories. Tuktoyaktuk got its first year-round road connection in 2017, when the Inuvik, Tuktoyaktuk Highway opened as the first all-season road in Canada to reach the Arctic Ocean. Before that, Tuktoyaktuk, known to residents as Tuk, was reachable by air or by ice road in winter. The 937 residents who live here now have access to a road, but what that road connects them to is the small town of Inuvik, 137 kilometers to the south, itself not exactly a metropolitan hub. The more pressing issue in Tuktoyaktuk is one no highway can solve: the permafrost beneath the town is melting. As the ground thaws, it destabilizes the coastline and the built environment above it. Houses tilt, land subsides. The Arctic Ocean, which the community faces directly, is eating the shoreline. Tuktoyaktuk is on the front line of climate change in a way that is visible and accelerating, and residents who have spent generations here are watching the land itself change beneath them. Number 17. Cambridge Bay, Nunavut. Cambridge Bay sits on Victoria Island in the Western Arctic and functions as a regional center for the Kitikmeot region, providing government and health services to a broad surrounding area. About 1,760 people live here, making it one of the larger communities on this list. Ships can reach the community during summer months through the Northwest Passage, and mining activity in the region has driven growth in recent years. Cambridge Bay has an airport, government buildings, and serves as a genuine service hub for remote communities that have none of those things. It is the kind of place that locals from communities further north think of as the big city. That fact alone tells you something about the scale of isolation that exists in this part of the world. One traveler documented a landing approach to Cambridge Bay, where the plane turned back immediately on descent because of fog. A single weather system eliminating access without warning, without backup, without timeline. Number 16. Churchill, Manitoba. Churchill is famous for its polar bears. Every autumn, hundreds of bears gather near the town to wait for Hudson Bay to freeze. And wildlife tourists from around the world fly in to watch them from specially modified tundra vehicles. What those tourists sometimes don't fully grasp is that there are no permanent roads leading into Churchill. You arrive by train from Winnipeg, a journey of roughly 48 hours through boreal forest and muskeg, or you fly. The train service itself has been unreliable in recent years, with long suspensions due to track damage from flooding. About 870 people live in Churchill year-round. Not just bear season tourists, but people who make a life in a community where the nearest highway ends hundreds of kilometers away. In summer, beluga whales gather in the Churchill River. In winter, the northern lights perform overhead with a clarity that is difficult to describe. Churchill is isolated in every practical sense of the word. It is also one of the more astonishing places on earth to spend time. Number 15. Kangiqsualujjuaq, Quebec. Most Canadians would struggle to spell it, let alone find it on a map. Kangiqsualujjuaq, sometimes spelled with slight variations, sits on the eastern shore of Ungava Bay in the far north of Quebec, home to 874 people. It lies more than 1,600 kilometers from Montreal. The nearest comparatively large community is Kujjuaq, about 160 kilometers away by snowmobile in winter, and Kujjuaq, with its full airport and population over 2,000, would itself qualify as extremely remote by most standards. In and out of Kangiqsualujjuaq means flying, or, in the brief window when conditions allow, accepting a cargo ship's irregular summer schedule. There is no road, there is no option. The community exists because the people who built it chose to exist there and they have continued to do so across generations of conditions that would defeat most outside visitors within a week. Number 14. Hartley Bay, British Columbia. Hartley Bay is in the Great Bear Rainforest on BC's north coast, surrounded by channels where humpback whales and killer whales are more commonly seen than strangers. About 200 Gitga'at First Nation residents live here, accessible only by boat or float plane. The community is one of those places where the isolation is also the reason for its existence. It sits at the center of one of the most ecologically rich and culturally significant stretches of coastline in North America. Hartley Bay made international news in 2006 when the BC Ferries vessel Queen of the North sank nearby, and residents launched their own boats in the middle of the night to rescue passengers from the water. No other help was close enough to arrive first. The rescue succeeded. The community of 200 on a shore accessible only by floatplane became the first responders for one of BC's most significant maritime disasters, because in this part of the world, you are your own emergency system. Number 13. Nain, Newfoundland and Labrador. Nain is the administrative capital of Nunatsiavut, the Inuit self-governing region of northern Labrador. And if you did not know Nunatsiavut existed, you are not alone. Located over halfway up the Labrador coast, Nain is a place where Arctic and Atlantic conditions overlap, where the fjords are genuinely dramatic, and where the Torngat Mountains National Park provides the kind of wilderness access that most national parks can only gesture toward. About 1,200 people live there. Getting in means flying into Happy Valley Goose Bay and connecting onward, or catching the seasonal Labrador Straits Ferry, which operates June through November and makes Nain its final stop, a detail that tells you exactly how far up the coast it sits. When the ferry stops running, you fly. When weather closes the airport, you wait. The isolation of Nain is not theoretical. It is the structural condition of daily life, and has been for the communities of this coastline for thousands of years. Number 12. Gioa Haven, Nunavut. Gioa Haven sits on King William Island in the central Arctic, and its name comes from Roald Amundson's ship Gioa, which wintered here in 1903 and 1904 as the Norwegian explorer navigated the Northwest Passage for the first time. Amundsen spent that winter learning survival and navigation skills from the Netsilek Inuit, who lived here, an exchange that almost certainly saved his expedition. About 1,300 people live in Gioa Haven today, carrying forward Inuit traditions of soapstone carving, drum dancing, and storytelling. There are no road connections. Access is by air, with sealift cargo deliveries possible in summer when sea ice retreats. The nearby Northwest Passage History Center preserves the record of exploration history in a community that never really needed to be discovered. It was already inhabited, already navigating, already thriving long before any European vessel appeared on the horizon. Number 11. Fort Severn, Ontario. Fort Severn is Ontario's northernmost community. It sits on the western shore of Hudson Bay, near the Manitoba border, and it has a population of around 500. The fact that it is in Ontario is one of those geographical surprises that genuinely startles people. Ontario extends much further north than most residents of Toronto imagine, ending at the Hudson Bay shore in a landscape that has nothing in common with the province's southern cities. The community belongs to the Anishinaabe people and is reachable only by air year-round, with a winter road available for a few months when conditions allow. The nearest permanent road in Ontario ends 450 kilometers to the south. Supplies are flown in. Hunting and fishing remain central to daily life. Fort Severn is a community that exists at the edge of Ontario in the geographic sense and at the edge of connection to the southern world in the practical one, and it has been there, functioning and inhabited for considerably longer than most of Ontario's southern cities have existed. Number 10. Evujevic, Quebec. Evujevic is on the northernmost tip of Quebec, at the point where Hudson Strait meets Hudson Bay. The mathematics of its location are striking. It sits 2,000 kilometers from Montreal, but only 500 kilometers from Iqaluit, meaning it is geographically closer to Nunavut's capital than to its own provincial capital. The harbor can remain open for only about 20 days each summer. There are no roads connecting Evujevic to other communities in northern Quebec. The only regular service in or out is Air Inuit, on a route that leaves once a day and takes 12 hours to reach Montreal. If you go to Evujevic and something changes, weather, mechanical issue, personal circumstances, you are staying until conditions permit otherwise. The community exists entirely on its own terms in a geographic situation that would seem almost comical if the people living there weren't so thoroughly and practically at home in it. Number 9. Ulukaktok, Northwest Territories. Ulukaktok sits on the western coast of Victoria Island, overlooking the Amundsen Gulf, the same waters that Roald Amundsen navigated during his Northwest Passage transit, the same gulf that British explorer John Franklin's ill-fated expedition was searching for when it disappeared. About 400 Inuvialuit residents live here today, maintaining a tradition of printmaking and carving that has become internationally recognized. Ulukaktok artists have been exhibited and collected around the world, which creates the somewhat surreal situation of art from one of the most isolated communities in Canada hanging in galleries in Europe and North America, while the community itself depends on air service from Inuvik for food and supplies, with seasonal barges when sea ice allows. The bluffs that give the community its name rise above the settlement in a way that turns the surrounding landscape into something that looks more like a painting than a photograph, which may explain why the art tradition here runs so deep. Number 8. Kugaruk, Nunavut. Kugaruk lies along the Pelly Bay coast in Nunavut's Kitikmeot region, above the Arctic Circle, beyond Canada's road network, dependent entirely on air service and summer barge delivery. About 1,000 people live here, hunting and fishing in patterns established generations ago, while also operating schools, local governance, and community health services. Arctic winter in Kugaruk is not the theoretical cold that most Canadians south of 60 imagine. It is the operational cold. The cold that determines what equipment works, what routes are navigable, whether the supply plane lands or turns back. Long darkness and extreme temperatures test both the machinery and the people who depend on it. Community events and storytelling have historically served as the social infrastructure that keeps small Arctic communities functioning through the months when outside contact is minimal and conditions are continuously demanding. Number 7. Taloyok, Nunavut. Taloyok holds a distinction that sounds like geography trivia, but represents a genuine feat of human persistence. It is the northernmost settlement on mainland Canada. Unlike communities on Arctic islands, Taloyok is on the Boothia Peninsula, the continental mainland, at a latitude so high that it challenges the basic assumptions of where people can build a permanent community and make it work. About 900 residents live here, maintaining Inuit customs through carving, fishing, and winter hunting. There is no year-round road. Access is by air, and during the brief summer season when ice retreats by annual sea lift. The tundra surrounding Talayoak stretches toward the Arctic Ocean in all directions, interrupted by shifting ice and, in the right seasons, the movement of caribou herds across terrain that has supported human life for thousands of years. Being the northernmost settlement on the Canadian mainland is not a tourist slogan here. It is simply the geographic fact of where the community chose to be. Number 6. Saxe Harbor, Northwest Territories. Saxe Harbor is the only permanent settlement on Banks Island, which covers over 70,000 square kilometers of tundra in the Northwest Territories, an area larger than Ireland, inhabited by a community of roughly 90 to 100 people. It is the only permanent settlement on the world's 24th largest island. Arctic foxes, musk oxen, and migratory birds outnumber the human residents by an enormous margin. The community is 500 kilometers from Inuvik, and everything that arrives in Saxe Harbor, food, fuel, equipment, mail, medical supplies, travels that distance by air or, during summer, by water. Aulavik National Park, home to the largest musk ox population in North America, is accessible from the community. Saxe Harbor exists as a reminder that the largest land masses in Canada are often the least populated, and that the people who choose to remain in them do so not despite the conditions, but alongside them, in a relationship with the land that most of the country has entirely lost. Number 5. Old Crow, Yukon. Old Crow sits above the Arctic Circle in northern Yukon, and since the last residents left Pauline Cove on Herschel Island in 1987, it has been the northernmost permanent community in Yukon Territory. It is also the only permanent community in Yukon that has no road connection. No highway reaches Old Crow. You arrive by small plane year-round, or sometimes by snowmobile in winter. About 245 Vuntut Gwich'in people call Old Crow home. The Porcupine River runs directly through the settlement, and caribou hunting has sustained this community for a time span that predates recorded Canadian history. The Vuntut Gwich'in have been here, hunting and fishing and maintaining a way of life built around the annual movements of the porcupine caribou herd for generations that stretch back long before the Yukon was a place that southern Canada thought about at all. Old Crow is isolated by road geography, but it is not isolated from its own deep past. Those are two very different things. Number 4. Resolute Bay, Nunavut. Resolute Bay sits in the high Arctic on Cornwallis Island, approximately 74 degrees north latitude, and it is one of those places where the statistics of climate stack up in a way that seems designed to challenge human habitation. About 183 people live here through 4 months of total darkness each winter, in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. Resolute Bay has a small airport that connects it to the outside world, but weather can cancel flights for days at a stretch without warning. Many residents work in mining, research, or government jobs supporting Arctic operations. The town has historical significance of a deeply uncomfortable kind. In the 1950s, Inuit families were relocated here from northern Quebec by the Canadian government as part of a sovereignty exercise, moved to one of the harshest environments in the Arctic to establish Canadian presence in the high Arctic, with inadequate preparation, supplies, or support. The relocation is now widely described as a profound injustice, and the descendants of those relocated families still live in Resolute Bay today, in a community born from a government decision that prioritized geopolitical chess over the lives of the people moved to serve it. Number 3. Bathurst Inlet, Nunavut. Bathurst Inlet is on this list for a reason that applies to no other community here. Officially, nobody lives there. The 2011 Canadian census recorded 0 permanent inhabitants, a drop from 5 residents a decade earlier. There is no phone service. There is an operational airstrip. The community that once existed here has become a ghost of itself, yet it cannot be called simply abandoned because people still move through the area, hunters, researchers, guides, and the airstrip remains functional for those who need it. Getting out of Bathurst Inlet, if you somehow end up there, requires a satellite phone to call in a plane because there are no roads, no scheduled service, and no other option. Bathurst Inlet is included here not despite having no population, but because of it. It represents the point where isolation becomes so absolute that even the attempt at permanent community eventually gives way to the land. The Arctic took it back. The airstrip stays open, just in case. Number 2, Grise Fjord, Nunavut. Grise Fjord, its Inuktitut name, Aujituk, means place that never thaws, is the northernmost civilian settlement in Canada, sitting on the southern coast of Ellesmere Island, the 10th largest island in the world. Fewer than 150 people live there, surrounded by polar desert, ice cliffs, and the kind of silence that most people have never experienced. The average annual temperature is negative 16 degrees Celsius. July, the warmest month, averages negative 7. Grise Fjord has the same colonial history as Resolute Bay. Inuit families were moved here from northern Quebec and Baffin Island in the early 1950s by the Canadian government, relocated to one of the coldest, most isolated places on Earth for the same sovereignty rationale. The government offered inducements, made assurances about resupply and support, and then largely failed to deliver on them, leaving families stranded in conditions far more extreme than their home communities. The Canadian government formally apologized in 2010 and provided compensation to survivors and descendants. The community they were forced to build is still there, still inhabited, still home, which is either a testament to human resilience or an indictment of the conditions that created it, or most likely both at once. Number 1. Alert, Nunavut. Alert is not a town or a village and does not have civilian residents in the conventional sense, but it is the northernmost permanently inhabited place on Earth, more northern than any other permanent human settlement anywhere on the planet. And it sits in Canada on the northeastern tip of Ellesmere Island, approximately 800 kilometers from the North Pole. The people stationed at Alert are military personnel and scientists, fewer than 10 of them living there year-round, on a rotating assignment basis that most of them do not volunteer for. The temperature stays below freezing for most of the year, without exception. For 4 months in winter, the sun does not rise. For much of summer, it does not set. Supply runs are military operations. There are no commercial flights, no roads, no civilian infrastructure, no connection to the ordinary life of the country that claims this point of land as its own. Alert exists because Canada has a strategic and scientific interest in maintaining a presence at the top of the world. A presence that is maintained by a small number of people living in conditions that most human beings will never come close to experiencing. It is the farthest edge of a country that already begins to seem impossibly vast from the inside. There is nothing north of Alert except ice, the pole, and the sky. Canada contains 10 provinces and 3 territories. It contains more than 3 million square kilometers of forest, more than 40,000 kilometers of coastline, and enough remote, inhabited, stubbornly persisting communities to fill a video series several times over. The 21 places in this video are not curiosities or anomalies. They are the lived reality of a country that most people who call themselves Canadian have never seen and may never see. The people in these communities are not people who failed to find somewhere better. They are people for whom these places are home, sometimes by choice, sometimes by history, sometimes by both, and who maintain that home in conditions that the rest of the country observes, at most, from a very great distance. If this made you look at the map differently, leave a comment on which place surprised you most. Like if you want more Hidden Canada content, and subscribe so you catch the next one.